So, hello everyone. Welcome to The Frank Life, a podcast inspiring you to take charge of your relationships, career, and financial success. I'm Frank, and I am grateful to have you joining us today. I have a feeling you're really going to love this episode, and I am totally not biased at all in that judgment. Now, since on last week's episode I coached someone on the air, today we're having another segment of Let's Be Frank, where in 15 minutes I share some real talk and practical advice to help you cut through stress so that you can create positive change in your life. So for those of you new here, welcome. If you couldn't guess, my name's Frank. I'm a leadership development coach and trainer, and I facilitate leadership trainings around organizations in the US, and I also have a coaching practice where I support individuals who are successful and looking to take their lives to the next level. And one of the most popular topics people work with me on is the focus of today's episode, and that is relationships, particularly intimate relationships. So perhaps you have a spouse or partner you love, but you're struggling to see eye to eye with them. Maybe you have some reservations on the direction the relationship is going, or you're on the fence on whether it's time for the relationship to end. Now, oftentimes, the first thing we do whenever we have doubts or fears in an intimate relationship is judge ourselves for having those doubts and fears. But here's the truth. It's totally normal to have doubts from time to time in a relationship. And that's because every relationship has its cycles. And it's important to know exactly what those cycles are in order to successfully take the relationship to deeper levels of love and passion. Now, before we talk about one of those cycles, I'm going to share with you the story of my relationship. So I hope you're ready for this jelly because we are about to dive in. Okay, so I had not much luck with relationships throughout most of my young adult years. I went through all of college without having any plus one or significant other in my life. And I graduated pretty much thinking that a relationship would be something that would happen later on down the line. So I had basically given up on hope for falling in love at that chapter of my life, and instead decided to focus my attention on what I was really passionate about, which was going off to China to teach English for a year. And that experience is a whole nother story that I will totally talk about in another episode. But for now, I was really getting myself in the headspace of leaving behind all my family and friends and basically packing up everything I owned to live on the other side of the world. So, of course, about a month and a half before my departure date to go to China, I ended up meeting a guy. So for our first date, we got lunch together and got to know each other a little bit. And we had scheduled our second date a few days later, but I unfortunately got terribly sick the night before and had to cancel. And I felt horrible about canceling that next day, but I just could barely get out of bed. My stomach was just in knots. And when I texted him to say that I was canceling, I assumed that he would just take that as, oh, I guess this guy is really not that into me. But he actually responded saying that, he wanted to know if I needed anything to feel better. So I said if it wasn't too much of a hassle, I would really appreciate if he could bring over some medicine. And a half hour later, I get a knock on my door, and I open it up, and he's sweating because he had walked across the city, and in his arms, he was holding not just medicine, but also tea and flowers that he had brought for me. And he stayed with me for about 6 hours that day just to make sure that I was feeling okay. So in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, this guy is pretty awesome. But I'm also thinking, damn you, universe, for giving me someone that's actually amazing right when I'm about to leave the continent. So we ended up staying in touch for that entire first year and basically built our relationship over a computer screen. And I was amazed at our compatibility. I was also truly in awe of how deeply he listened to me and cared about who I was and what I was passionate about. So after I finished my year in China, we moved in together and found a place in Vancouver, British Columbia, which is where he was pursuing his PhD. But as time went on, things began to change, and we ended up experiencing a lot of storms and conflict in our relationship. We were triggering each other left and right, we were getting into these arguments, and it was really difficult for us to manage our stress. We both really valued growth and we wanted to learn how to make things better because we deeply loved each other, but something was not working. So we started to create all of these vision statements for our relationship, and we began to immerse ourselves in these relationship programs and even hired a therapist to really help us get through what was really keeping us stressed out in our relationship. And as we were doing all this work, I began to have all these doubts. And no matter how hard we tried, I felt like nothing was making anything better. And one of the things I learned was that although we deeply loved each other, a lot of that love was actually towards the hope of who the other person could become rather than who the person actually is. And I want to emphasize that one more time because it was one of the biggest ahas I had in my life at the time. We loved the hope of who the other person could be rather than who they actually were. So as much as I tried to fight back all these doubts I was having about whether we should stay together, whether I should leave the relationship, those doubts kept pushing back. And no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that things could work out, I realized that was a lie. I was telling myself in order to avoid the truth. Things needed to change, and accepting that was painful. My partner would go to sleep at night, and I would stay up in the living room crying. I was mourning the loss of our relationship before I even acknowledged that it was over. And I talked to our therapist about this and asked her if I could arrange to break up with my partner at our next session. So she pulled out her calendar, and lo and behold, our next session fell on February 14th, Valentine's Day. So of course I'm thinking, wow, awesome! What better day to break up with someone than Valentine's Day? So leading up to that day, I felt terrible because I knew what was coming. Just the idea of a breakup didn't feel loving at all. There was nothing loving about the thought of saying, I want to break up with you and I hope you're okay with that. So I began to explore how I could extend this as an opportunity to really see eye to eye with him and for us to be fully honest with who we both are in the relationship so that we could both make a conscious choice. So when it finally became time for our session on Valentine's Day, I looked over at my partner and I said, I love you so much, and I so appreciate how kind, loving, and supportive and patient you've been with me. And as much as I know you love me, I know that I don't love who I am in this relationship. And as painful as this is to say, I feel that things need to change. Because what used to work for us in this relationship is no longer working. And we both can agree that we need to be honest with ourselves so that we can be fair to the other person. And it's not fair to either of us to be in this relationship out of fear that we might be alone forever. And it's also not fair for us to be in the relationship because we're concerned about what might happen to the other person if we leave. And last, we don't want to stay together if it means tolerating each other, rather than accepting and loving one another unconditionally. So with love for you, I invite you to be honest with me about what we both want to do moving forward. Because if this relationship continues, it will mean completely redefining how we relate to each other, and I'm open to that. And I'm also open to ending our relationship if it means we both can walk away being true to who we are and what we both want. Whew. So as you can imagine, it took a lot of vulnerability to share that. And my partner needed time to process that. So he went home and I ended up renting a room for the night. And the next day, I went back to meet up with him in the evening. So I opened the door and he had classical music playing in the background, and we sat on the couch next to each other and we looked at each other in the eyes, and he grabbed my hand and he said, Frank, you are so brave. Thank you so much for being honest with me and sharing what's been on your heart lately. I will always love and admire how brave you are. And as he was saying this, I could see tears starting to roll down his face. He continued on to say, I too see the need to end our relationship. And after he said that, there was just a huge emotional release for us. We both opened up in ways to each other that we never had before. We were so vulnerable. We apologized for things we hadn't apologized for before. We shared a lot of our deep feelings and fears that we've had. And it was so beautiful to have this moment of vulnerability with each other. And to truly honor our choice to end our relationship, we decided to create closure by having a burial. So we took a small picture of us from a trip that we had made a couple years prior, and we actually went outside and dug a small hole by a tree. And we placed the picture inside the hole and reflected on our relationship from the day we met back in Boston to the time we moved in together in Vancouver, to all the special memories we shared, all the way up until that current day, our final day together. And as we were reminiscing, we cried, we laughed, and through all of the pain of our breakup, there was also something so beautiful about it, because we were able to have closure on what truly was an incredible relationship. And we lived happily ever apart. So that is my breakup story, you guys. So here are the 3 main lessons I learned from that relationship. Firstly, a breakup is not a failure. After we broke up, a lot of my family and friends said they were sorry to hear about my breakup. And the words "I'm sorry" did not resonate because I didn't judge my breakup as something bad. I actually feel like I had the coolest breakup ever. Our breakup served such an incredible purpose, and it was an opportunity for us to acknowledge what an incredible 3.5 years we spent together. So the second thing I learned is that all relationships reach a point where things need to change. All relationships have times when what worked before no longer works. And that's because people grow. People are always growing, evolving, and changing, especially when they're in relationships. So it becomes our responsibility to know who we are growing into in our relationship and if that's the person we want to be. And this is also the point when couples need to come together and decide how they want to continue the relationship. And this is when we experience sadness, pain, and heartbreak. It doesn't always mean that when we reach this point, we have to break up or get a divorce. What it does mean is now we're reevaluating who we are, what we want, and how we want to move forward in creating that. And sometimes moving forward means moving apart. And the third lesson I learned is the importance of closure. When you are going through a breakup, it is crucial that you don't carry any of the judgments on yourself or your last partner into your next relationship cycle. So if you go into your next relationship thinking, oh, well, men are jerks, or oh, I can't trust people over money, or oh my gosh, I'm just really a selfish person, that's going to spill over into the next relationship patterns that you have. So by having closure and being at total peace with how your last cycle ended, it'll open you up to create new, healthy, passionate relationships. Now, a lot of people have asked me, how did I get to a point where I had the clarity of knowing what to do in my relationship? And really what it came down to was asking myself really deep questions. And I'm happy to say that I've actually compiled several of those questions into a free ebook that I am giving away. It is totally yours and available to you right now. I just uploaded a brand new ebook to my website last night. So head over to thefranklife.com to download 88 eye-opening questions that will boost your energy and also help you create passionate, loving relationships. And if you remember from my story, one of the questions that really changed things for me was asking myself, who am I being in this relationship and who do I want to be? Because if there's anything holding you back from expressing yourself fully in a relationship, it's time to have a conversation about that with your partner. So as we wrap up today's episode, take a moment and think about your intimate relationship. What do you really need in that relationship right now? And how well are those needs currently being met? What needs to change? And what needs to be buried? And that brings us to the end of today's episode. I will catch you on our next episode next Friday. And as always, it has been great being frank with you. Ciao for now.